wish you the best with it.
Thank you very much, Terry.
Expo 67, Canada's 100th birthday party, which about 50 million people will probably attend. At a total cost of some $500 million, Expo represents the largest ever Canadian peacetime construction operation. With some 70 other countries, Australia is participating to the tune of about $3 million. And the symbol of Australia's presence at Expo is the Pavilion, designed here in Canberra at the Department of Works by the department's principal architect, Mr. James Maccormick. Mr. Maccormick, what do you see as the importance of this trade fair to Australia?
Well, firstly, Carolyn, it is not a trade fair, it's an exposition.
Mm-hmm.
And the last one that was held was back in 1958 at Brussels, which was approximately half the size.
To the country as a whole, what do you feel is the significance of this for us?
Well, I think, Carolyn and many other people who have worked with me on this project, that this is the most important thing that has ever happened to Australia culturally. It will be the first time that Australia has ever participated in an exposition. And really also, I think I should mention the Department of Works is extremely proud of having been associated with it and has distinguished itself as being on time, within its budget, and having produced a design which many people think could be compared with the world's best at Expo 67.
I know that before you took up this appointment in Canberra, you lived for a number of years in Canada, so you probably know the site of Expo pretty well.
I think I could really have thrown a stone from where I lived in St. Lambert, which was on the mainland, just adjacent to these new man-made islands. And from my days in 1960, of course, it has changed considerably. But you see an upper island which is not completely, almost completely man-made, and a lower island which was completely man-made. And this is adjacent the entrance to the St. Lawrence Seaway. You see also the connecting bridges, two of which are on the extreme right and left-hand side, which have been existing for many years, and two new access ways. An upper bridge which carries a railway and car traffic, and an underground metro which runs through underneath the island. The majority of the buildings and pavilions are on these two islands.
Before we have a closer look at the Australian pavilion, can we see some of the others to get an idea just what we're up against in the way of competition?
Yes, I think our first example would be appropriate, the Canadian pavilion at Expo 67, a series of pyramids and a huge one inverted on its nose. The expenditure on this was quite impressive. I think some 21 million Canadian dollars was spent on this particular pavilion. Another pavilion, which is a spectacular one, which was the American, a beautiful site in landscape surroundings, in height something like a 15-story building, and it's like a sphere, but it's glass. The sunlight can pass through this, and it's built out of a Buckminster Fuller system of construction, which is called geodesic dome construction. Another pavilion worth noting is our next-door neighbour, perhaps our biggest competitor in eye-catching appeal. The highest mast there is 180 feet, and this is the result of a national competition out of about 80 German architects. Our next pavilion is the French one, which I understand has one of the biggest floor areas. The other pavilion following is the United Kingdom one. It is distinguished for having no windows and depending almost entirely on artificial light. It is the work of the noted English architect Basil Spence. And of course, finally, ours, which we like to think is functional simplicity and restraint.
I don't know if this is an impossible question to put to an architect, but can you give us some idea how you evolved the design for this pavilion?
Well, I like to think, Carolyn, that in the years of association with Mr. Roy Grounds down in Melbourne, that I'm one of his protégés, and very much fascinated with the symbolism of circles and squares and triangles. I think in some buildings this is possible, and it was particularly so in the pavilion, the Australian pavilion, to achieve this symbolism of two themes, similar to a Beethoven symphony, say. And you'd note there a variation on squares, major square and minor ones on the roof pattern. And then on the lower floor, contained within this, in geometric precision, is a series of circles, major circles and minor circles, in the proportion of 2:3, making up 5, which is really interesting to me. And this circular arrangement has been carried outside in the landscaping of Mr. Robin Boyd.
Are there any parallels between your pavilion and some earlier forms of architecture?
Well, of course, now, with all the soul searching, we've gone back to the magazines and books to have a look, see where we actually fit in. And it has been rather interesting to note that there are some interesting parallels with our building. I've always been quite fascinated with the architecture of the English and the cathedrals, the Gothic fan vaulting, And there is a very strong similarity here, but it also can be picked up in the cathedral in Brasilia of Oscar Niemeyer, which is in a way a rather similar form, but inverted to our roof form. And finally, another interesting parallel would be in Turin in Italy of the noted engineer-architect Nervi, with his similar mushrooms or tree forms.
Well, how are all these thoughts applied to the conditions set you in designing the Australian pavilion?
Well, of course, with a late start, we had no time, a matter of days, to design our pavilion, and we had to make some pretty wild decisions. We only had a site and a restriction of 40% that needed to be built on that. And we started from there, conceiving the most interesting type of enclosure that we could.
Can we look at the model, perhaps get a better idea in that way?
I think if I could just demonstrate here that within these square independent roof forms, there is a new innovation that we don't know of with parallel, where the roof form has been widened out, or its trunk, so that it is hollow. It not only allows air circulation down into 4 mechanical equipment basements, but it also allows for natural light to filter down into the exhibition floor and even further down onto the ground floor underneath the whole building. And what is to us interesting is this close relationship, few times achieved, between structure, mechanical equipment and architectural design, where all have been combined, because once the air has been received into the basement, it is pumped up through the hollow laminated timber cantilevers and dispersed uniformly throughout the area of the building.
Now, in this model, the roof, of course, is off. One thing I noticed particularly, the walls sloping inwards.
For a number of reasons, the glass walls on the north and south faces have been splayed. A overhang, what amounts to an 8-foot overhang, allows for a connection of glass on the incline. This inclined glass cuts down on the amount of sunlight penetration. It cuts down on reflections from inside and from outside. And the other 2 remaining walls, in the same way, have been splayed for consistency, and they have been made solid to cut down on acoustical interference and to give us somewhere internally to hang some exhibits.
How are the exhibits disposed in this area?
Well, of course, it's dictated by the 4 trees, and there follows as a matter of course that there are 4 sections of display. There would be way of life, national development, science and art. And you would note, if we had a closer look inside, that these 4 sections have their exhibits at their centre, and surrounding each of these circular tables that look rather similar to flying saucers that landed, set on a vast sea of Australian woolen carpet that not only goes over the whole floor area but up the walls as well, that surrounding these flying saucers you have some 60 chairs in the 4 sections in 2 colours. You can sit in one colour and you can hear a stereophonic conversation in English lasting for 3 minutes in the high wing back of the chair, or you can sit in another colour and you can hear French being spoken. Now, there are some 16 messages that if you wanted to, you could get out of the Australian Pavilion. But having had your 40 minutes, which we anticipate within this area, you would pass out through the exit and down a long ramp, which eventually takes you to the lower level, 12 feet beneath main exhibition floor, to the fauna exhibit at the rear of the pavilion. The only way you can actually get to see the kangaroos and wallabies is by passing through our pavilion to get there, and there are strong embankments that drop down either side. And in a recessed pit, some 3 feet 6 beneath the main level, there are the kangaroos and the wallabies that are associated with Australia, and their heated hut that they can take refuge in. And underneath the building, adjacent to this area, is a representation of real Australian coral, transported to Montreal under great difficulty, and specially coloured. And you would find moving water and fish in this. And then, finally, you would have this large landscape around the pavilion, treated in the dry Australian character with natural eucalypts and shrubs and gravel, and you would pass out to the street from where you started.
Sounds magnificent. I really feel as though I've had a good look over it. Jim, briefly, could you tell us what stage construction's up to at the moment?
Well, at this exact moment, our latest telegraphic communication is that the building is now fully enclosed, a little bit more advanced than the month-old photograph we have here, and heated for the onslaught of the Canadian winter, which is about to start.
Well, no doubt you'll be among the thousands of Australians going to Canada for Expo next year.
Well, as pavilion architect, I'm required to be responsible directly to Cabinet and it is my responsibility to successfully design this pavilion, and that duty is not completed until it's built, of course. And I would anticipate, to fill my duty, that I would be back there in March of next year to make a final inspection as to its acceptable standards.
Fine. Thanks so much for coming in. It's not every day you can look over a building with the architect who designed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caroline.
And with that very close look at Expo and Australia's part in it, we come to the end of this Studio 11. Hope to see you again same time next week. Goodbye.